Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, as you know, I'm a huge fan and getting more and more of a huge fan of F1 gaming and driving simulators. None more so at the moment than the F1 game. It's something I've used in preview videos to Grand Prix to do a bit of a track guide. I'm becoming a huge fan of it, and because of that, I've been really interested to find out more about how that works, how those games are created, and how the collaboration works between Codemasters and the Formula One teams, Formula One themselves, and the tracks. So on that note, I'm delighted to say that today I'm joined by the game director of the Formula One franchise at Codemasters, Lee Mather. He joins me via Zoom, of course. Hey Lee, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Nice, thanks for having me.
I think you're going to be able to answer some questions that I've had for a long time, and I'm really keen to find the answers out to. And I think a lot of people watching will also want to know these things, because, I mean, let's start by how things must have taken off for you in 2020.
Yeah, it's been absolutely astonishing. I mean, I've always said that when we started doing the eSports side of the Formula One franchise in 2017, that was growing year on year, and it's been really seeing good, steady growth. You know, we've been broadening the audience. There's been more of the Formula One hardcore fans actually recognising that a virtual race can be just as exciting as a real race, and that there is a real skill involved in it. Yeah, there may not be the physical side of it, but the skill is still very much the same. So this year, that's just gone through the roof. You know, it's accelerated at such a rate, and I think the visibility of the drivers actually streaming the races themselves as well, seeing the physicality that does go into it, hearing them finish the race, and you know, you hear, you know, Charles and Alex and George come back with, you know, I'm absolutely sweating, I'm exhausted, that was adrenaline filled. You know, they're absolutely pumped from it. You know, it's like people are starting to realise that gaming's serious as much as it is fun.
Yeah, and the competitive nature of the drivers. I mean, they want to win, don't they?
Yeah, you'll never take that away from a driver, will you? I think most of us are the same. You know, we all sort of get there and it's like, it'll be a bit of fun, give it 5 minutes and the competitive animal comes out every time.
I mean, let's start with Formula One themselves. I mean, how much of a supporter have they been of what you're doing, and how's the relationship been between the two of you?
Yeah, I think in the last few years, obviously there's been an influx of new people join Formula One. And some of those guys have got a very tech and digital savvy sort of background, or they're looking more at the virtual side of things. You know, they've got departments now dedicated to supporting gaming titles. But yeah, so it was very much straight away, what can we do from the Liberty side? What can we do from the Codemasters side? Everybody wanted something that we've, you know, basically to arrive at what we've got. And then I think obviously that's grown. You know, in recent years, we've made such huge strides in just how it's lit and how it looks. Obviously, the vehicles have always been modelled accurately. We always get all of the data from the teams, the CAD, which we can build the vehicles from. So they've always looked, you know, true to life. But it's not just that. It's how you light the scene. It's how you present the track. It's how you do the intros. It's how you do the broadcast. It's how you do the audio and the music. All those things come together to make the package.
Yeah, it's a much bigger operation than you might sort of first assume. You touched on there the collaboration with the teams. Really interested to see how that works on a practical level. So when you're looking for CAD data from the teams, I mean, we all know how secretive teams are sometimes of their own technology, their own IP.
Yeah.
How freely are you able to get information from them? You know, if they make a sort of update, a substantial update to their car, do you get that information? Do they notably hold things back? I mean, what's that relationship like?
So we've been doing this for quite a long time now, and over that period of time, we've obviously built that level of trust. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, if a team has that one thing that they know is going to make them dominant that season, like, you know, for example, Brawn and the blown diffuser, you know, things like that were so secretive. Nobody saw them till the car was seen in Melbourne. So there's always going to be some degree of, if there's something which is super secretive, there's always going to be something that's maybe missing from the initial drop that we get, and we'll build the car. The team will be happy with the car we built, and then once the season's up and running, we'll get updated data and we can update the cars. That's something that we do. But obviously we have to be incredibly careful with it as well. So we have really stringent process in place for any of the CAD data we get from the teams. Literally nobody on the team other than the individual who has to deal with it has access to that data. You know, it's not just that, oh, I'd love to see what this year's cars look like. No, it doesn't work like that. It's as secretive and encrypted on our end as it is for the teams.
So that's interesting. So you've got a guy, presumably, you know, within your team that's assigned to each one of the Formula One teams in that regard, have you?
Yeah, we have a vehicle artist team. So there's a bunch of guys who build the cars, and obviously those guys and the legal team are the only people who actually have, like the licensing team, are the only people who have access to that information. So even I don't get to see the cars at the very first drop, because that's super top secret. That's the way we have to work.
And when you talk about getting data, updated data as the season goes on, is that data in terms of performance that you're picking up from real life, lap times and results, or are the teams supplying you update data as the season goes on?
So, I mean, when I was referencing data before, I was referencing more the visual side of things. So, yes, we get those updated over the course of the year. Sometimes we'll ask a team if there's something that's changed on the car, and we say, we'd love to be able to represent that for you in the game. Can we have the CAD? We'll do that. Sometimes the teams will make a change, maybe a sponsor change or a very obvious visual change, and they'll send us the data and request that we update the car so it stays, fresh and up to date with the real world. But then when it comes to performance data, obviously the teams are never going to share things like that with us. That is incredibly secretive. We get hints and tips. We get pointed in the right direction. The technical team at Formula One are actually incredibly helpful when it comes to the performance of the cars. So when we first start building the cars, for example, I mean, going back to how this all begins, we get the technical regulations that all the teams get, and we start looking at what we think the car's going to come out like based on the technical regulations. So we start building our cars based on that, because obviously that's years in advance. So we start with the technical regs, then we start with the knowledge of what we have of the Formula One car in general. We'll look at the engine type, because obviously anybody who understands vehicle engineering will understand the power delivery type of an engine, the difference between a high revving V10, or a V8 or V12, or a turbocharged, V6 as we have now. So, you understand the power delivery of the engine, the sort of style of the torque curve. So we can start building from that. And then we go to the extremes of, we often send our handling designer out to the first test of the year. He'll stand there and he'll watch cars, and he'll just get a feel for how they move, how they turn in, the change of direction, the way that they sound on and off throttle, just to get some idea of the way that they work in the load on the engine. Crazy things like that. And then obviously he comes back to the studio, and the handling guys start to build the cars from there. And then once the first race of the season has started, in fact, saying from the tests, we actually, this year we've had to take what could be a theoretically best lap time, because no team ever does a full lap fully on it. We obviously look at the sector times, try and work out whether we think that they were going for it or not, try and work out what would actually be a theoretical best. And then when the season starts, obviously we pick over the data very closely, and the FIA website gives really detailed lap data for all of the teams, and we'll take that, put it into a spreadsheet, and work from there as well.
I mean, I was going to ask you actually, particularly with regard to this year, how you're going to judge the performance of cars. I mean, you're obviously, you've answered it there, in that you're basing what you can from pre-season testing. Presumably you will also look at how they finished last year as a bit of a guide. And are you talking to people at the teams and people from Formula One? Are you talking to well-known people to get their impression of how they interpreted things like pre-season testing?
That's exactly what we've done this year. So we obviously we start with the base of where everybody finished last year. That's we weren't expecting any major changes over the winter, no changes to the rules, so we're expecting very similar sort of placement. We obviously then, as I say, took what we saw from the pre-season test, and then I don't know if you saw the Formula One guys, the technical team over there, put together just on the website a summary of what they thought the season start order was going to be, and we obviously spoke to them and said, well, this is what we think. This is what you think. This is how we came up with our idea. This is how you came up with yours. How do you feel about that? And that's how we came to what we think will be the start of the season.
Okay. And then just to finish off with the cars, the idea of the technical updates. I mean, somebody asked me on Twitter yesterday to put this to you. What about when somebody comes up with something like Mercedes' DAS system that was kind of revealed in testing this year? I imagine that's a really hard thing to model in the game because it's so specific to one car. So is it something that either will feature, or have you even considered trying to feature that in the 2020 version of the game?
Yeah, it was certainly a curveball, wasn't it? I think we were just blown away by that. I think we were sat there, and the number of us stood around a monitor just scrutinising that piece of footage. I think Ted Kravitz was narrating it, talking about obviously Lewis on the start-finish straight at Catalonia. Yeah. And we've been having quite an in-depth discussion around whether that's something we can bring into the game now. So obviously, we're coming up to our submission window to get the game ready for release, and that was something that came about really while we're pretty much towards the end of our development schedule. And while you might think it's quite an easy thing to add, it's the knock-on effects are fairly vast. So, I
Yeah.
mean, for starters, from a player perspective, you've got to find some way of being able to actually activate. So
Yeah.
we've obviously limited to the number of buttons on a controller and on a wheel. So we need to accommodate that. We then need to obviously have the animation for the driver to do this with the wheel. We need the wheel to animate. We need to ensure that the physics works correctly. So obviously, as you change the toe, is that going to have the desired effect? It will, because it's physics and our physics is correct. So if we obviously add or decrease the toe, you'll get the desired feeling effect, and you'll get the desired change to the way the tires will wear, maybe slightly more with a little more toe.
Yeah.
But the car will obviously move around more if they're not towed in so much. Your straight line performance will be better but more awkward to control. And then you've got to consider that the AI have to do it as well, because you can't just give something to the player that the AI don't have. So if you've got you're driving for any team that's not Mercedes, the two Mercedes drivers, the two AI drivers, are also going to have to be able to use that system as well. Because if there is even if it's a small advantage, it would be unfair for them not to have that. If you're driving, say you're driving as Lewis and Valtteri doesn't have it, that would be an unfair and a disconnect from the real world. So there's a huge amount of things to consider with it, but we are discussing it at the moment.
So it's still a possibility.
It's not out of the question.
Okay, wow. So even this late in the day, it's possible to add in, what would be a fairly major addition at this point.
So it would be a post-launch thing, most likely, if we do it. We have a live ops support team who support the game once it's out. So that gives us the flexibility to do things like that.
Okay, that's interesting. And then just looking further ahead, because one thing that struck me was that, like you said, you're basing a lot of the performance data on maybe what happened last year, pre-season testing. When we come to this major rule change that's coming, that's now being knocked on to 2022, obviously previous car data will be almost irrelevant in that sense. You've got a complete rebuild to do in terms of the cars, how they perform, how different technical aspects like aero works on the cars. Presumably that's a massive job for you guys.
So we'll, as I mentioned before, we'll go by the technical regulations. We'll go with, as soon as we get the CAD data, we understand the wheelbase of a car. We understand, roughly the placement of everything on the vehicle. So that makes a big difference from the starting point. Is the wheelbase of a car has such a pronounced impact on the way it feels and handles that's obviously correct in the game. So those are the starting points. And then again, I say we'll go to the technical regulations, but also we do have some great contacts on the technical team at Formula One. So they obviously can't give us individual car performance, but they're the guys who've created the rules. They understand why the cars are being designed as they are, why the changes to the rules are as they are. So they can at least explain to us that this change will have this effect compared to the cars that we previously had. So we can understand, for example, that we need to put more focus on our underbody aero as opposed to wings, for example.
Yeah, okay. So again, you're going to be really heavily reliant on that relationship that's been building over time. And I presume at that point, even more so than they are now, the teams will be perhaps even more secretive, particularly if someone finds a loophole in these new set of regulations about how much they're going to be willing to offer you guys, certainly in the initial run of data. Potentially.
I mean, at the end of the day, they are there to win, aren't they? And if you've got something that gives you an edge, I mean, we've seen over the years, like I said, Ferrari engineers stood at the back of a car covering the whole rear end, for example. As soon as a team gets something, even when it's out in public eye and there's people able to photograph it, they still do their best to keep it secret.
Oh, yes.
So,
I've been there. Okay. And then what about the relationship that you guys have with the drivers?